Hello and welcome. This is Rooflemonger and my friends. Today in this video, we're talking fighting game lore. Yeah, the silly stories around the fighting game themselves and all the fighting game characters therein. Some people, they kind of scoff at the lore and story in fighting games. Certainly it can't match up to my favorite JRPG or whatever, right? And that's exactly what I want to talk about, because in a lot of ways, the lore and the story of fighting games is one of the most important and critical aspects of any game. Because, long story short off the bat, really, before we even get into it, if you take away all the lore, the story, the aesthetics, the everything, what do you wind up with? You wind up with a bunch of functions. And functions, well, they don't really hold the attention, do they? They don't create memorable characters that have lasted decades and decades, like fighting games have. So that's really the first thing right there. What makes fighting game lore and story so important, right? Besides just you picking your character, finding what kind of fireballs you like to spam, what kind of uppercuts you like to mash, right? The story gives you the flavor of the character. So for an example here, let's use Ryu. Ryu is the face of fighting games. Ryu is the face of the genre. And how about his story? Is it really that complex in the end? Well, no, not really. He's simple fight man, and fight man likes to fight, and he wants to fight the best fights he can. But therein lies a lot of it. A lot of Ryu's appeal can simply be found just by watching his Street Fighter II ending. So let's have a look. Right there is a lot of the appeal. He wants to get better, he wants to fight better foes, but he's not in it for money, he's not in it for fame, for rewards. It's purely for the sake of the fight, and it's perfect because as the face of fighting games, the fight is what it's all about. So that's the surface level. When you want to start digging deeper, you can start getting crazier. Like Ryu, as you can see, he's glowing all crazy red here, because he's got some problems with the martial art he knows, and Satsuken, which is an assassination art that brings in the evil within him, and he can turn into evil Ryu. So he always has that inner demon to conquer, and in the context of the Street Fighter V story mode anyways, he does, which works out great for him, I suppose. But there is a what if DLC of Kage, and Kage is evil Ryu if evil Ryu is even more evil. More in line with Akuma, and Akuma, as fighting game lore goes, has the same martial arts style and totally fell prey to the evil side of it, and in fact defeated Ryu's master Gouken, who taught Ryu basically not to use the evil side, and Akuma is constantly tempting Ryu to do exactly that in a sort of join the dark side Darth Vader kind of a relationship. So now all of a sudden, simple fight man who wants to get better, well, he's got a whole push and pull between good and evil on top of this to strive to get better. Another interesting lore bit as far as Ryu goes, despite the fact that he's the face of the franchise of Street Fighter and the face of all fighting games, he doesn't actually really win the tournaments outside of the first one. Yes, he won Street Fighter 1, but past that, not so much. Like for the events of Street Fighter 3, Ryu, the face of fighting games, he loses, straight up. He doesn't get anywhere near Gil, the big bad boss at the end of Street Fighter 3. Oro beats him. Alex, the big stand-in for Hulk Hogan, basically, is the one who winds up winning the Street Fighter 3 tournament. So Ryu doesn't. And that's just a fun aspect of his character, because the journey is never over. He's always fighting to get better and better and better. And despite being the face of the game for so long, he's still got a lot more to go. And frankly, even though it takes a long time and many years over the games, it's fun to see his character develop in these ways. He's the main character of Street Fighter, but he's not the strongest character in Street Fighter, and that's very interesting. So that's a character example here. Now let's take another look at why I find lore from a personal perspective very important in fighting games, because it's what got me into Mortal Kombat. So the Mortal Kombat 1 arcade machine, in between showing gameplay footage and all that, it would show little excerpts of the characters and their story, and it honestly got me very interested. And then it really entices you because Goro lives, and it gives you the background of this awesome looking creature. You know, it was the early 90s, this stuff was badass, right? And it gives you the whole story of Goro. He's the champion of Mortal Kombat, and he's the guy you gotta look out for. Seeing this kind of stuff is exactly the kind of stuff that got me to put in my quarter into the Mortal Kombat 1 arcade machine versus just playing Street Fighter 2 all over again. And story is one of Mortal Kombat's biggest strengths. Going directly to Mortal Kombat 2, it gives you a whole recap of what happened in Mortal Kombat 1 and introduces new threats. You see, Liu Kang was the official winner, and knowing who won the last game in a tournament style game is very cool, right? That is very interesting to learn who won what tournament, and we can talk about that in a minute. But yeah, we introduced the new big bad. Shao Kahn is here, oh my god. Very enticing, put in your money, you gotta see this guy. And all this hype and excitement is purely because of the story. If it was just random faceless martial artists going at it, well then you basically get something like Pit Fighter. Now for you younger folks out there, Pit Fighter was a mildly big deal at the time, mostly because of the graphics, because it looked really good for the time, but the graphics was all it really had. There's no real story other than pick your character and beat the crap out of the other characters, and that's about it. So nobody remembers Pit Fighter, but everybody remembers Mortal Kombat. And the reason they do is because Mortal Kombat has a definable just world to it. The characters, the setting, the everything is all informed thanks to its story. Take the Living Forest stage from Mortal Kombat 2, for example. This stage is one of the best stages in fighting game history. The music's really intense. The trees are definitely alive and they don't look real happy. They look like they want to mess you up. And why is the Living Forest this way? Well, it's because you are in Outworld. You are no longer on planet Earth. Things work differently here in Outworld. We're not in Kansas anymore, right? And why are we in Outworld? Well, it's because of the story, right? Shao Kahn's real mad, did some stuff to make sure that the second Mortal Kombat tournament happens in his place, on his terms, with his rules, versus how it was in Mortal Kombat 1. So this crazy stage with all the stuff to it, these man-eating trees, all that kind of stuff, all exist to serve the story. If this was just bland and flavorless martial art tournament number 2 on the success of martial art tournament number 1 game, we would never have gotten a stage like this, and a stage that has persisted throughout all the years. It's all thanks to the lore. The story of any given fighting game also obviously informs its aesthetic, and Darkstalkers is one of the best examples of this. So the demon world is just on top of the regular world, and the two can mix quite a bit, and thus Darkstalkers has lots of legendary style of supernatural and horror characters. And the story informing this aesthetic is so strong, Darkstalkers hasn't had a new game in over 20 years, yet these characters are still very memorable, and so many people know who they are, even though a lot of you guys have been born after the last Darkstalkers game was ever made. Like, let's take a case example of Morrigan. Y'all know who Morrigan is. Maybe you never played the game she's from. Maybe you played one of the many games she's been a guest star in. But it just goes to show the aesthetic is so strong. And yes, I know there's two very big reasons why the aesthetic is really strong. But the aesthetic is so strong, she has survived past her own franchise dying. And the reason she looks the way she looks and why she's so popular the way she is all thanks to the background of the game informing it. In a game full of werewolves, Frankenstein monsters, Chinese ghosts, Canadian Sasquatches, Morrigan is there to be the succubus, the evil demon that entices men to their dooms. And due to that, and just so much of the beauty of this franchise, even though this franchise has quote unquote been dead for over 2 decades, it will still live on forever because everyone will remember this cast of characters. If everyone was just a bland function without all this extra flavor added to them, the franchise would simply be dead and forgotten. So I hope some of these points have impressed upon you why fighting game lore and the story, aesthetic, background, all that kind of stuff is so important. But just one more thing is, for me, who's been in the fighting game business for as long as there's basically been fighting games, I just find a lot of the lore rewarding to learn because there's so many little tidbits. If you're the kind of person who, after watching your favorite movie, favorite show, playing any game, the first thing you do is you hit up the wikis when you're done because you just want to know more, and more, fighting games are amazing for that. Like knowing Paul Phoenix should be the winner of the Tekken 3 tournament, but he isn't because of a technicality, because he didn't know that Ogre had a second form. So he beat the first form Ogre fair and square, this strange mythological creature, and then he decided, okay, you're beat, I leave. And then after that fact, then turns out he had a second form, which Jin beat. So Jin became the winner of the Tekken tournament and not Paul. Which would go on to inform later plot because he's kind of bitter about that fact. And also he's sort of bad with money and he runs into some debts because he didn't get any money because he technically didn't win. And then just lots of other madness ensues. And because of these things, I love Paul for it. I do like him because of his gameplay too, but knowing his madcap story and knowing he's strong enough to beat the final boss but yet gets kind of screwed over in the end, that makes me like the character more. Knowing in King of Fighters 2003 that the Akari Warriors team, Leona, Ralph, and Clark, they're the official winners. It's the only King of Fighters game where the hero team is not the winner of that tournament. Knowing that they won their own game and they're like weird side characters, that makes me like those characters a lot more too. Knowing this weird little factoid of the fighting game lore makes me a lot more attached to the characters because it just kind of works out that way. For whatever reason that brings you to the dance, that is the beauty of fighting game, just story, lore, background, all that kind of stuff. Do you like the character? Do you like what the character story is? Do you like how the character dress? Do you like how they fight? All these things are informed by the greater overall plot, even if it is simple in the end. Maybe you won't find complex 40-hour-long RPG depth in some of these characters. Sure, yes. But it doesn't make them any less cool, and honestly, most fighting game characters persist throughout the ages much longer than any given RPG character, even if that RPG character technically has more story. Just having more story does not make for a more memorable character necessarily, and the beauty of fighting games is they have so many memorable characters. I'd argue, and yes, maybe I'm biased, but I would argue more than any other genre of game. And that, in the end, is basically what I have to say on the matter. For those of you already invested in the fighting games, I know you understand, right? It's so much more than just you picking the character that has the fireball you like. Even if you're the kind of person that picks their character based off of in-game character strength, like tiers. Many people, once they pick their strong high-tier character, they go backwards in time trying to learn everything they can about said character because you want to learn more about a person that you're putting a lot of time into. So for those that scoff about just fighting game story and just all the backgrounds of fighting games, I say there's so much more to it than you think because the story informs everything. From how all the characters look, to how all the characters fight, to a lot of the background stages. And nowadays, a lot of fighting games are just getting full-on giant cinematic story modes. Like the Guilty Gear Strive one's like almost 4 hours long, if not longer. It's already there for the people who've been interested all this time, and it's just becoming a bigger and bigger deal and more integrated with every upcoming fighting game. Like, not to date this video, I guess, but whenever Street Fighter 6 comes out, expect a big cinematic story mode for that game. Of course, there'll be brand new characters, and the reason they'll look the way they look and fight the way they fight is because of whatever story they have. The upcoming League of Legends Riot fighting game. That is a franchise already with tons of pre-established lore and characters, and expect a lot of that to be showcased very heavily in the game, some way, somehow. In the end, the flavor is what makes a lot of fighting games what they are, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And I hope you guys can appreciate that, because, man, I love fighting games so much. And without these silly little backstories, they wouldn't be the same to me. Anyways, that's my thoughts on the matter. So my friends, thank you very much for watching. Hope this video has found you well, and go out and play some fighting games.